Hack. Triple J.
It was a sort of quasi-fascist dictatorship and a cultural sinkhole, mate. It was just awful. Everybody who had two brain cells to rub together wanted to get out, and that wasn't just cultural people. There's a lot of people working, in corporations, big companies. They left for the same reason that poets and painters left. It was just a terrible place to live.
That's John Birmingham. He's the famous Brisbane author, and the Brisbane he escaped was the Brisbane of 20 years ago. That city sounds massively different from the city that Hack's coming to you from today.
People say we're bogans or say that all this kind of stuff, but we know it's not true.
It's changed in the way that you don't actually have to get out. I think it's more, if you want to do something creatively, you do it yourself.
There's no doubt life has changed here. But will it be enough to stop young, creative Brisbane people migrating south? Find out as we hit day 3 of the Queensland mission.
Got great beaches, great mountains.
Hack.
Triple J.
I love Queensland. It's amazing. It's changed. It's more crowded.
Yeah, it's definitely growing. Definitely more friendly than Sydney or Melbourne.
Hello, Tom Tilley with you. Coming to you from Brisbane today as we hit day 3 of our Queensland mission. Each day this week we're travelling north through Queensland all the way to Cairns. We're looking at just how much this state is changing. On Monday we came to you from the Gold Coast where we looked at the challenges of massive population growth. Yesterday we were in Toowoomba talking to locals about how much the trauma of the floods was still on their minds. Today it's Brisbane's turn. We're looking at whether or not there's been enough of a cultural change to stop young creative people from leaving. Even Anna Bligh told me that Brisbane was a cultural backwater in the 80s when she grew up, and there was pretty much a cultural exodus.
This was, I think, rightfully regarded as the cultural and social backwater. When I was growing up, if you were interested in youth music, you left the state, because otherwise you might be arrested.
Yeah, what was it like? You called it a backwater before. Did it really feel like that at the time?
Yeah, it did, and it certainly, I know many talented young people that I went to school with and went to university with. There was a sense that if you wanted to get ahead, and particularly if you wanted to work in some of those cultural sectors, you didn't do it here, you left. And we had a really big brain drain.
One of the people Anna Bligh was just talking about was John Birmingham. He's the author made famous by the hilarious 90s novel Died with a Falafel in His Hand. It was about sharehouse living in Brisbane and in Sydney. He grew up and went to uni in Brizzy in the late 80s and early 90s, and he paints a shocking picture of what life was like here at that time. He was back here now, living in Brisbane in a suburban home with his new family, and I went to talk to him today.
I actually knew a couple of people who were forced out of the state. They were anarchists, they were all the demos and stuff, and they just eventually pissed the National Party government off to the point where a couple of special branch bobber boys came around, turned the house over, dropped a bag of dope on them and said, "You'll be leaving?" And so, yes, they did.
Paint the picture for us. What was it like going out even to rock gigs in those days?
Look, it could end up being pretty dire. Brizzy actually had a thriving indie rock scene. In fact, it's arguable that the Australian punk movement started up here with guys like the Saints and so on. The flip side of that sort of creativity was that it was a reactive sort of thing. That a lot of the anger of the earlier bands was directed against the fact that they were stuck here in a place that they didn't want to be. So you could you'd go out to something like a Triple Z gig and you could have an absolutely great time, or you could get your head caved in by the cops if they decided to come in and shut it down. That was still going on in the 1990s. The little indie station up here, Zed, used to run a market day. That was how they raised their funds. And there was an infamous event one year where, this market day's running no problems at all, and, all of a sudden there's 120 riot cops just steaming through with batons, beating everybody down. And I wrote a story about it for Rolling Stone. To this day, no one can figure out why they did it.
Tell us about the time where you got arrested for protesting for free speech.
Yeah, it sounds a lot more noble than it was. I was trying to break into writing at that point, and I'd entered a writing competition for a magazine called The Independent Monthly, and I decided my story would be getting arrested for something stupid. And what I did was I took a big piece of paper and I just wrote the words free speech in tiny little letters right in the middle of it and held it up until it was deemed I was a threat to the security of the state, and I was arrested. Anyway, I wrote it up, and I think I won that comp, and I made $1,500 in prize money, which covered, I think, my $400 fine and a night of inconvenience in the watch house. So I came out ahead. Sucks to be you, Joe Bjelke-Petersen.
Yeah. Eventually, once you finished uni, you took off to Sydney. What was the catalyst for that?
Share housing in a funny way. I'd started working for a lot of magazines. I wanted to work for mags. It's all I wanted to do. And they were all based in Sydney and to a lesser extent in Melbourne. And I found that I used to be hopping on a bus and riding down to Sydney once or twice a month to schmooze the people running, say, Rolling Stone or Juice magazine or Inside Sport or whatever. I'd go down there, I'd stay on people's couches, get as much work done as I could, and then come back to Queensland and wait for my tiny contributor's check to turn up.
You're listening to John Birmingham, the author, here in Brisbane. We're sitting in his writer's retreat underneath his big Queenslander house in a nice suburb with a view of Brisbane. John, if John Birmingham was 21 today in 2011, do you think he could live his dreams here in Brisbane?
I suspect so. I don't know now that... I really don't know that you have to leave in the way that you really did have to leave. There's no compelling political reason to go anymore. The thing that drove me down to Sydney and Melbourne anyway, which was the need to physically walk into a magazine office and talk to an editor, isn't necessarily there anymore. Those cities are still great, and I think if you're going to live a full life, you should spend some part of it away from where you grew up. Even if it's only 10 or 12 years, you do need to get out of your own backyard at some point.
John Birmingham, thanks for speaking to Hack from your writing retreat here in Balmoral, Brisbane.
I prefer to know it as the Lair.
Thanks so much.
Cheers, mate.
Triple J's Queensland mission on Hack.
You'd struggle to find stories quite as graphic as John's descriptions of police brutality in the 80s. But the arrest of a Fairfax journalist, Ben Grubb, yesterday in Brisbane raised a few eyebrows. The young tech writer was attending a conference here when he was arrested and had his iPad confiscated. He called his boss, tweeted his 5,000 followers and waited to see what the charges were. He was later released without charge, but Gold Coast police say he was held because of an article he'd written on a Facebook security flaw. It showed a privacy expert accessing images from supposedly private Facebook profiles. Detective Superintendent Brian Hay initially said it was like receiving stolen goods, but refused to go into the details of the 20-year-old journalist's case.
The reality is the online environment is now an extension of our real community. And if we go into that environment, we have responsibilities to behave in a certain manner and not break the laws, just as we would in our walking down the street of our local neighbourhood.
Even though the policing may have improved, the artistic expression here in Brisbane is encouraged. A lot of people are still leaving the state. We're going to have a story coming up on that in just a moment.
Triple J's Queensland mission.
The people.
The floods.
Everyone loves sport here.
Queensland.
I think we're a little bit different to the rest of the country.
Hack.
To find out how people now in Brisbane are getting on with their creative lives, if that is the pursuit they want to follow, we went down to QUT today to talk to young students in the creative areas, journalism, fashion, design and creative arts, to hear what they had to say. Students are walking past, busily hurrying off to class while others chill out on the grass here, just near the cafe on the Kelvin Grove campus of QUT. We've got the Triple J Vox Pop booth set up. A few people are starting to line up ready to talk to us. Okay, cool. All right, you have to share this mic.
I think the scene here, I think it's super strong. I think it's really strong.
I think it's kind of reaching a really great kind of time in Brisbane. Like there's heaps going on in different areas in the arts. So
It's like a small town thing. It's weird. It's not Melbourne, it's not Sydney, but because it's not that, because it doesn't have it readily available right there, this cultural kind of dominance, you have to look for things. And I think people are looking really, really hard.
I think there have been windows where I could have left and had opportunities to study elsewhere, but there are enough things happening here that kind of keep you here.
Joanna and Anne have rocked up to the Vox Pop booth here at QUT. They both did undergrads in TV production and they're both back here doing postgrads. Couldn't find work?
There's stuff happening at the Gold Coast and, you know, there's the TV stations here, but it's mainly technical work and we're more on the production side of things, so we would have to move down south for that.
And you didn't want to do that?
No.
Why not?
Love Brisbane. Yeah, we are. We have a love affair with Brisbane. Love the lifestyle. Just not ready to make the change yet.
So is it disappointing to have to make that career sacrifice to stay in Brisbane?
Massively, yeah. It was a big hurdle, I think, for myself, just knowing that I've done a degree but I can't really use it. So kind of have to alter your life plan fairly dramatically, but I think it's worked out well in the end.
When you don't have a massive infrastructure helping you out all the time, people make their own fun, which I think is there's a real strong tradition of that in Brisbane, going all the way back to when we did have a really repressive...
So what are you talking about? Warehouse parties?
Warehouse parties, house parties.
Yeah, what are the house parties like here?
Fantastic in the summertime, you know.
Big Queenslanders, banging, full of people.
Yeah, just people setting up drum kits in their kitchen and 50 or 60 people. I mean, I drove past where I live in Toowong a couple of weeks ago and just on the main drag there, and there would have been like 300 kids at a punk show there.
Some of my friends who moved to Melbourne, I just kind of have to roll my eyes at when I see them, because they just talk about Brisbane as if it's this tiny little thing, whereas I see it as being an underground. There's lots of underground kind of creativity happening here.
My little brother lives in Melbourne and he does sometimes make fun of me. So,
what does he say?
Oh, you know, he just says you're in Queensland. And it's...
What a horrible payout.
I know, it's just like, well, what am I supposed to say that? Yes, I am in Queensland and it's pretty awesome. At least we're not freezing our asses off in Melbourne. That's right.
Do you think Brisbane's fully shaken the label as being a cultural backwater?
I don't think fully, and I think we kind of wear it as a bit of a badge of pride. I mean, Queenslanders are kind of... We don't want to be like Melbourne and Sydney. Like, we're from Brisbane. Like, we're Queenslanders. Like, we're different, and people say all sorts of derogatory things, but we wear that kind of... People say we're bogans or say that all this kind of stuff, but we know it's not true, but we kind of wear it as a badge of pride, and that's something you really will never understand unless you live in Brisbane. Like, it's just a different mentality. We don't want to be like Sydney or Melbourne. Like, we're Brisbane, you know.
Young artists and students there speaking to me down at QUT in Brisbane today, and we are coming to you live from Brisbane on our Queensland mission. It is day 3, and we're looking at Brisbane's culture and how much it's changed in recent years, whether it's enough to keep young creative types here. Ben Priest is with us. He's a music manager. He manages Hungry Kids of Hungry, Ballpark Music, and he books a few nights here in Brizzy. He's basically got a few fingers in the Brizzy music pie. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Ben, we've heard a lot of cultural positivity from young Brisbaneites, but we also heard horrible stories from John Birmingham. Has Brisbane changed a lot since the days when he lived here?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I'm only a young guy still, I think, in terms of that, but I haven't had any bad experiences as such yet.
What about the nightlife and the band scene? How strong is it at the moment? Because we have heard of venues like the Troubadour closing down quite recently.
Well, yeah, the Troubadour did leave a big hole. I used to book that venue here in Brisbane, and it has left a big hole, obviously, for the middle ground bands. You know, you start off somewhere small and you might end up at a zoo or a hi-fi or something like that. But the Troubadour did leave that gap, I guess, for that middle sort of building band to, you know, we sold out the Troubadour, we sold 200 tickets to a show to move on to the next one. So there is that sort of middle ground that's missing a little now, yes.
Well, we'll speak to Jamie Travascus in a moment, and he used to run the Troubadour when it was open. He runs a new bar now. He'll be with us in a sec. But one of the big bands you manage is the Hungry Kids of Hungry. Mm-hmm. And we've heard that they thought about moving to Melbourne. We'll get to that in a moment, but a lot of people have actually done that. Let's hear from them. And this is the current generation, not just the people of John Birmingham's generation.
I used to think that Brisbane was a place that artists come to hide and die.
It seems to be an ingrained cultural thing.
You know, there was a sense that, you know, people came because they didn't make it anywhere else.
Most of the people that I went through uni with are still in Brisbane. It's more of whether they're still doing music.
Brisbane has a problem. It's not that there aren't any artistically inclined people who grow up here. It's just that many, when they get to a certain point in their career, leave.
The structure of the economy in Brisbane is very much based around construction, around energy and mining, whereas the creative and the cultural industries are not as big as they are in places like Sydney and Melbourne.
Ben Eltham is a writer and festival director who moved to Melbourne about 3 years ago. He was running an arts festival called Straight Out of Brisbane, but when, like with many small arts festivals, he showed the state government a balance sheet in the red, they pulled funding and he was then forced to abandon the festival.
In Brisbane, it can be quite difficult because there's not a lot of support for the underground and for the grassroots culture, and so there tends to be a bit of a haves and haves not phenomenon where people are in the cultural institutions have good funding but they're locked into some pretty traditional program structures, and there's a really exciting underground culture, but it's not very well funded. You know, like Brisbane still doesn't have a fringe festival, and I think that's a disappointment.
Wesley Enoch grew up in Brisbane in the 70s.
It was always on the edge. You know, I grew up under the Joe years, so you felt like the arts and culture scene was always the alternative voice. It was the things you used to do to protest. It always felt like the arts were this tool of social change, if you like.
He left Brizzy about 10 years ago, and since then has had a massive career internationally, as well as winning a swag of awards for his work with the Sydney Theatre Company, Company B, as well as directing the Indigenous section of the 2006 Commonwealth Games opening ceremony. Not bad, eh?
It's almost like Brisbane at the time felt like a hothouse, you know, where it developed up its talent and nurtured it, but you never knew whether you could actually live on the national or international stage. You know, I've got a very healthy ego when it comes to these things. I remember doing a show in Brisbane for 1,000 people and thinking that was success, and then going and doing the same show in Sydney and playing to 7,000 people and going, wow, you can reach so many more people this way. And you start to go, well, success, I think, is about reaching as many people and affecting as many people's lives as you can. And so sometimes you're looking for bigger population centres to do that.
He's now settled back into life in Brisbane as the artistic director of the Queensland Theatre Company. He says Brisbane today is a really different place.
Now, my God, Brisbane's really amazing. It's really invested in artists, but also infrastructure. I mean, Goma is amazing. But also the number of theatres, and I'm going to make up the figure, but the number of theatres in the last 15 years in Brisbane has doubled. You look at the Powerhouse, you look at the Judith Wright Centre, you look at the number of theatres that have been built new, and you think, wow, there's a real growth in the Brisbane art scene.
Jill is a recording engineer, and after seeing heaps of her mates from uni struggle to get jobs and end up working in retail, she left Brisbane to look for work in Melbourne. She says as a young producer starting out in the industry, the more established engineers just weren't interested in mentoring up-and-comers.
It just didn't seem to really be happening in Brisbane a lot. There's a lot of young people starting up their own studios for that reason.
She says the art scene in Brizzy can feel really confined.
The thing that I like about Melbourne is there seems to be projects happening locally in the suburbs. Within the block that you live, there's probably a studio or someone will have some kind of backyard setup or something. Whereas Brisbane, I kind of felt that I had to actually drive somewhere. They have the valley and the city to an extent, and West End, where most things seem to happen. But that's beginning to break down, I think, which is good and probably what Brisbane needs.
Wesley says the challenge is developing a unique artistic culture without trying to be a facsimile of the Melbourne or Sydney scene with added sunshine.
We're only, an hour or so's flight away from Sydney, only a 2 hours flight from Melbourne, blah, blah, blah. I used to think that Brisbane was a place that artists come to hide and die. You know, there was a sense that, people came because they didn't make it anywhere else. But now I think there's a real challenge for all artists to act in a confident manner. You know, you don't just kind of dip your head and say it's always better somewhere else. It's saying what we're making and what we're doing is just as important.
That's Wesley Enoch, Artistic Director of the Queensland Theatre Company, speaking to Irene Scott.
The bush and nature, the more simpler things.
The big wide open spaces.
I wouldn't say there's too many bad points about it,
Just happy-go-lucky kind of people.
Oh, it does. It's perfect.
Oh yeah, we are on the Queensland mission on Hack this week, day 3. We're coming at you from Brisbane. We've got a few texts coming in on 0439757555. Ben says, I lived in the Briz for 8 years and I love the place. It has a lack of pretension and a willingness to embrace a lighter shade of serious culture than I've experienced elsewhere. No black skivvies. And someone else says, talk to Indigenous people to find out how bad the police still are. Brisbane is still conservative and backward. Ben Priest is still with us. Ben's a music manager. He manages the Hungry Kids of Hungary. Ben, they were thinking about moving to Melbourne. What happened there?
Well, we did. I guess we did entertain the idea for a little while. Basically, the band started to get some recognition, I guess, and once that happens, then Brisbane's a great place to be. There's a creative community, and you can jump on a plane and head to Sydney and Melbourne whenever you need to. I still feel that a new band starting up perhaps is a little bit inhibited, basically because the industry is in Sydney. So, you might be playing at a local pub and, you don't know who will stumble on in. That doesn't happen as much in Brisbane, obviously.
What other disadvantages are there?
Distance, I think, more than anything.
But obviously you think a band, if they want to, can do it from here.
Yeah, I certainly think so. We're doing it as we speak, I guess. We haven't made it all the way, but Hungry Kids of Hungary and Ballpark Music are certainly examples of bands that can get up there, I guess, with the help of national radio and the internet. Certainly helps, I guess.
Jamie Travascus is here, and he runs a bar now called The Junk Bar. But Jamie, you were managing the Troubadour. What happened there?
It closed.
We've got that part of the story. Why?
Yeah, well, that's a very long story, but in the end, I guess it's just a combination of a lot of things. One being a landlord, two being Fortitude Valley, and
the way it's run, the way the council zones it, and the people and the police it.
Just what it's turned into. It's just become a little impossible for the Troubadour to survive in the area it was in with the landlord it was. Does
it say something bigger about where the scene's at?
Not really. No, I don't think it has anything to do with the scene.
So do you still have a lot of hope for the music scene here?
I don't think the closing of the Troubadour or any other venue opening up really has anything to do with the scene. The scene will always be here. Bands are like weeds. They're going to go away. They just keep on growing. So,
do you agree with that, Bren?
Yeah, exactly. There's no shortage of creative people in Brisbane that, border on everything from terrible to fantastic, and
they'll play if they want to.
They certainly will, yeah.
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot about these guerrilla gigs that go on here in Brisbane, and one of our reporters, Patrick Abud, went along to the setup one of these gigs to check it out.
So we're standing here in the alleyway of Wynn Street. What we're looking to do here is rock up with a hired trailer with full music production equipment on the back, park it in the loading zone opposite this little alleyway where there'll be a gathered crowd, and put on two bands unannounced and see what happens. I'm Chris, I'm 26. I've been doing guerrilla gigging for about 4 years now properly. I started off as a typical nightclub promoter doing a club night series, touring interstate bands in venues around town. There are a few issues there with venues paying and not rewarding the passion and time that young people are putting into the local music industry. Well, guerrilla gigging is essentially the evolution of live music. It's taking artists and their music into perfectly matched locations and making magical experiences happen. For that, you have to go outside and make the whole world your venue. A lot of this is born out of Brisbane's changing venue scene. Being a music lover in Brisbane, we're constantly having to stand by as our favourite venues shut down. There's 6 or 7 places where I've spent 3/4 of my adolescence that no longer exist. Just from that general sadness that comes with that, you need to do something that's not so site-specific. So I think the concept of guerrilla gigging, if we can start to make that a legitimate part of the music touring scene, can really exist forever above and beyond specific locations. The great thing about Brisbane's art scene is it's pretty organic and it is people-driven. I've been inspired by multiple events that I've been to in Brisbane that are way above and beyond things that I think I could even pull off. And they're just things that happen. Local bands like Velociraptor playing Halloween house parties and hanging from chandeliers. Other local bands like Slug Guts playing midnight sets, and as you walk by a house or a flat in Petrie Terrace, you hear these sludgy underground soundtrack wander in, and there's one of the best bands in Brisbane just playing in their lounge room just because. Early on, putting on guerrilla gigs, really went for the guerrilla angle and probably went a little too extremist. Got in a couple of situations with police and constantly putting on gigs where we weren't really welcome. So you learn a lot along the way about how to integrate what you're doing with the local environment. And guerrilla doesn't necessarily have to be an unwelcome thing. Early on, yes, there were gigs in, abandoned pharmacies. There was a gig in a church playground, a gig underground in a sewer that we tried to do. Some really great events. One 15 metres above a Paddington market with the super fun Happy Band playing from a scissor lift to the crowd below them, which was an amazing experience. Everyone grows up trying to operate within the normal way of doing things, but just by being in Brisbane and knowing so many amazing, interesting people that want to do creative things, you can just hook up and do your own thing. So it's definitely a choose your own adventure, make your own fun scenario in Brisbane.
That's Chris Spann from Guerrilla Gigs in Brisbane speaking to our reporter Patrick Aboud, and Ben Priest is the music manager. He's with us. Ben, how important are those gigs, those banging house parties, it sounds like, and guerrilla gigs for bands?
They're great if you can pull them off. I mean, obviously the police shut them down pretty quickly from my experience anyway, and I think the success of them is determined perhaps from how cool your neighbours are. More than
and which
anything.
suburb you live in?
I live in Chapel Hill, which is west of the city, about 10 kilometres out of the city.
What's that like for putting on house parties?
It was good 5 years ago, and at the moment it's terrible.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
Jamie Travascus is here, and he runs a small bar now after running the Troubadour. His new bar is called the Junk Bar. Jamie, how hard was it to get that up and running?
It was harder than it was made out to be.
Right, okay.
It was a long process and takes a fair bit of dedication. It's just not, just come up with the idea and next thing, 2 months you're open.
How long did it take you?
Minimum 6 months.
Okay.
So you got to be prepared to, wait it out.
People have described it to me as like a sort of a small, loungy kind of Melbourne bar. Would that be the right sort of description?
Yeah, well, I just think they may say that just because it is different for Brisbane, really. People say it's anything from a New York bar to anything. It's just different from what you would normally get in Brisbane. And I guess that's all, Melbourne's the closest reference.
Okay. Yeah. How important do you think little bars like this are to kind of building a strong cultural scene in Brisbane?
I think it's really important. If every suburb in Brisbane had a small bar, then those intense hotspots would just dilute and the city would just flourish a lot nicer.
Jamie Travascus, thanks for joining us on Hack today.
No problem, thank you.
And Ben Priest, thank you for joining us on Hack today as well.
No problems, thanks for having me.
Triple J's Queensland mission.
I love it. It's great.
We're pretty relaxed up here.
Apart from the recent weather, it's usually quite sunny.
Triple J!
And that's all we have time for on Hack today. We've got a massive show coming for you tomorrow. We're going to be going all the way to Mackay. We're going to be talking about mining there. Mining is a massive industry. Basically, if you want a job, that's where you're going to be getting it. If you want to make a fair bit of money, here's a little taste of what you're going to hear. Turns out it doesn't work out that well for everybody.
Imagine spending up to 12 hours a day working in the dark. That's pretty much what you're about to experience here at Australia's only fully equipped underground mining simulator.
It is hard work. It's manual handling. It's hot. You work long hours, 12 hours a day. That's not all standing on a machine and pushing buttons, what most people think. Some jobs go for a day, some tasks go for a couple of weeks.
The mining industry has been a big effect on my life because it's broken up my family. I've lost my mum because of it. It's crap. Hack.
Triple J.
We'll be talking about how the way the industry affects some of the less fortunate in the community. We'll also look at how the coal-focused community will change as Australia tries to adapt to a low-carbon future. Places like Mackay will really feel the brunt of any policies like the carbon tax. All of that tomorrow on Hack. And if you can't wait, you can jump on the website and check out some of the stories that are already up there. They're up there in their multimedia glory, triplej.net.au.net.au/hack, and click through to the Queensland Mission website. There's some great stories from all the towns we visited. And you can see the Vox Pops as well from the last 2 days. We set up on Cavill Avenue on the Gold Coast. We set up in the main street of Toowoomba. And tomorrow we'll be in Mackay from 12 till 1. They're ready with a big Triple J banner, ready to talk to you about your life in Mackay and how you think it's changing and how it might change in the future as it adapts to a low-carbon economy. Catch you tomorrow at 5:30.